this one, so it won't show up anybody on the screen. And is, oh yes, that's now working. Okay, so excuse me, Ninian Smart, having encouraged people to go and study lots of different religions back in the 60s, 70s, he's then faced with this question of how do you define religion? People started posing this. And if you are just teaching one single religion, you can reasonably well define what Christianity is. You can reasonably well define what Islam is. But it's the making of comparisons that becomes a challenge. So, for example, if we were to say religion is the worship of God, that seems like a not unreasonable statement to make. Then somebody turns up and says, what about Buddhism? There's no God in Buddhism. Buddha is not worshipped. Buddha is a teacher, he's not a figure of worship. So is therefore Buddhism not a religion? And some people turn around and say, no, it's a philosophy. Other people point to 50,000 temples all over the world with massive great statues of Buddha in them, and people praying and meditating and contemplating Buddha, and say, well, technically, he might not be a god, but there's an awful lot of people treating him as if he were. Absolutely, they take him as this great figure of reverence. So on the one hand, no, he's not a god, but on the other hand, Buddhism looks an awful lot like religion. They do many of the same things that most other religions do. So does that mean you don't have to have a god to be a religion? And what about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans? They didn't have a god, they had hundreds of gods. So is it just one? Is it hundreds of them? Is it none of them? Are all of those variations still religion? So could you have, like Buddhism, a religion in which there is no deity at all? And a lot of people have suggested, yes, you probably could. So if the presence of God is not required to define a religion, what is? And so you get other suggestions, and Ninian Smart goes on to list 7 different things and says if you've got all of these 7 different things, then you're probably a religion. And it starts to open up the debate as to quite what does count as a religion, and equally what we would put to one side and say, well, not really, no, that's not actually a religion. So, for example, is being a Jedi a religion? It started as a bit of a joke, people dressing up as Star Wars characters and saying, oh, we're Jedis now. But some people do take it really quite seriously. And it's not just a sort of dress up in a funny costume and tit around at the weekend activity. So is for some people this now becoming a religion? At what point does it stop being a science fiction film and become a basis for religion? Because they go around talking about the Force, may the Force be with you. And that's not so far very removed from what some real religions, if we can put it like that, also talk about a presence, a force, a power in the world that you can hope is on someone's side. You know, may God be with you, may the Force be with you. Is that such a very different notion? And how far do we want to take this? There are people in the world who treat Tolkien as a sort of mystical text and start talking about the gods who are mentioned in the Middle-earth saga as if they were real gods. There's a horror writer from America who's been dead for quite a few years now, called H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote some very florid horror stories in which there are these ancient demonic monsters from beyond the cosmos who are worshipped by mad devil-worshipping cults, and they have tentacles and things. And he was he was a novelist, he was just making up stuff as he went along. But there are now people who actually turn up, put on their robes, prance around their candles. Why you'd want to, because they're all meant to be mad demons that eat your soul. But for whatever reason, they decide they want to give it a go and worship the demons mentioned in Lovecraft's horror stories. Now, are they just a bit mental, or is this bordering on becoming a religion?
Oh yeah, but they're taking it from something fictional, and I mean, if you really think about it, like they're taking it from a book or from a movie, but The Bible is a book. The Quran is a book.
Don't say that one too loud.
I'm religious, I'm not saying it, but like,
It's what people want to believe in.
Yes.
It's what grabs them.
Yes.
So there's something in those people where they find some sort of comfort.
Absolutely. I'm not sure what. Yeah.
They're in a sort of like home, so they sort of home in it on it, and it's sort of like
Absolutely.
most people want to feel safe. Religion can feel like a home.
Definitely. It gives a sense of purpose, a sense of structure, reassurance, a sense that there is a purpose and it's not all just random nonsense, which life can very often feel like it's a load of random nonsense. So it's rather more reassuring to be told there is some plot, there's a purpose, there's, you know, things are meant to happen rather than just being random chaos. I still don't quite get the whole worship of Lovecraft demons, because what comfort there is in worshipping something that's going to eat your soul, I don't know. But to each their own, indeed.
People that be in one way punished, isn't it? In religion.
Could be, or the pursuit of power. Maybe they think they can get the demons on their side and they can.
those are the scary ones. Those are the ones you got to look out for. Hide the wizards.
And in a similar vein to the works of fiction issue, there's a Swedish researcher whose whole area of study is this kind of thing. But the Scientology movement started with L. Ron Hubbard, who was a science fiction writer. And he started he claimed to have these revelations from the aliens about how they'd seeded humanity and influenced humanity and all this sort of thing. And admitted several decades later that this was just a kind of a joke to see if he could. And he could, and he did. Now he's dead. But the actual Scientology religion is still going. And they now claim that, yes, he thought he was doing it for a laugh, but actually the aliens really had been contacting him. And now please give me some more money, which is largely what Scientology seems to boil down to. So that started, again, an author of fiction. And whilst his first few books on the subject, he presented as, oh no, these are my visions, he did eventually say, well, sorry guys, made it up. Oops.
I was going through some quotes of Lydia, and one of them, I'm sure, said something, if you think it, it can happen.
Yes, and
So-
devote your mind enough to an issue.
Yeah, so in theory, he's saying if you think it, it can happen.
Yeah, and from, again, sociological point of view, if somebody treats a thing, system of belief, as their religion, even if it was made up last Thursday by some novelist writing books, they are treating it as the center of their life. Therefore, from an academic point of view, you could say it becomes a religion, dodging those arguments about ultimate truth. Whether it's true, whether it's some made up palaver, kind of neither here nor there. These people believe it to be true. It's referred to as the Thomas theorem.
Yeah, we don't care if it's true, do we? Sociology, we care about how it helps.
Exactly. How does it shape their life? That becomes the question, not are they crazy or are they following truth?
We call these century religions. We could have been having this discussion.
Then when they started.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Bible has a lot of fictional things in it.
Well, and this is a whole debate in theology with the Bible, the Quran, and various other texts. Which parts of it are absolute truth? Which parts of it are metaphor?
Yeah, I was reading the work of someone, I can't remember his name, he was discussing the Bible and he was saying that to his conclusion, the Bible, although he believes, because for example, a lot of the, I don't know the word in English, but like baggage, it's like with the bugs and the frogs and that, yeah. Some of those could have been like the sea splitting, could have been explained with some natural things. So he believed that there was some truth in there, but they added like
Metaphors.
to it, and they added some fiction to it. So like, not even the Bible was like.
Started as 3 plagues, ended as 10.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and certainly in some religions, there are several branches of Islam, the Salafi, for example, who would find it an unbelievably offensive question to even ask which bits of the Quran are true, because their approach is it's all true, it's all the word of Allah, and to question any of it is blasphemy. Some fundamentalist Christians would say the same. Others would say, well, this parable is a metaphor, this poem is metaphor, that bit is history, that happened, but this bit didn't happen. And so you get the more kind of liberal Christian who will not treat the whole thing as a historical record, will treat it as a combination of history and poetry and law and moral guidance and various other things as well, which doesn't mean it's untrue, it just means it's true in a different context. It has symbolic truth rather than historical truth. Whereas to the majority of Muslims, the Quran is historical truth rather than metaphor.
Seems drawn to have compass.
Because we'd probably be quite dangerous without one.
We've been dangerous with one.
Even more dangerous without, yes. We're hard enough to behave ourselves when we do have a moral compass.
So we're the only things that ever question. It's something else to hold on
We don't
to,
know.
because otherwise you go.
There is a debate going on in some circles as to whether animals have religion. Is it just humans? Elephants, well, possibly bees, but certainly elephants will stand over their dead and cradle the bodies for quite a long time after it's obvious that they're decaying.
Especially if it's their
Child, yes. And if that was a human doing that, you'd say this is mourning. This is someone tending the bones, maybe believing, and you could even argue, if you go back to ancient history, there's a grave in Britain that's about 30,000 years old, which has traces of flowers and various other things that were placed in the grave. So in other words, they didn't just sling the corpse over the nearest cliff and forget about it. They buried it. They put it in a fetal position. They put gifts in with it. Possibly not in the sense we mean today, but it shows they must have had some belief about the dead. Yes.
In society.
Yes.
When they pass, they care for the body.
And possibly believe the soul is around and needs to be treated in a certain way.
When did the soul come?
No one knows when that idea first started. It goes back into the mists of early history.
So weird thing, we've had the concept of a soul and a moral compass for so long, but only in the last 100 years, not even that, have been, I mean, I guess our perception of a moral compass has changed, but up until like 100 years, we were like very brutal, and we were, you know, like, we used to watch cats burning as entertainment.
Yes.
Like, it's weird.
Fucking donkeys off hours and all of that. Yes. We're a bit quick. In terms of, we won't go over all of Ninian Smart's 7 things, but in terms of some of the other elements he talks about, the unity of ritual is in all of these ones on the slide and plenty of others that aren't on the slide. They all engage in ceremony and ritual, annual ones and life events. So birth, death, marriage, etc. Festivals of summer, festivals of winter, festivals of this, festivals of that. So it seems to be a singular feature. You will be very hard pressed to find any religion that doesn't have a lot of ritual. There's always something going on in the ritual line. Morality, teachings, how to live your life seems to be a very, very common feature. They don't agree how, just that they will tell you how.
But it was usually the people who didn't agree with you, wasn't it? Who were, you know, that's still the case. If you had to you had to have that moral compass which said, well, you're the only right one, you know,
All the others.
People of another religion are not necessarily the sinners, but not worth bothering with. You know, they haven't got a soul like us, they haven't got a belief like us, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And certainly that role of othering, which is the modern sociological jargon, treating somebody else as if they were weird and strange and very, very different, is you could argue part and parcel of many religions, that there's us lot and then there's those weird lot over there. And gives guidance on who the weird lot are,
Yeah.
why they're weird,
Witchcraft.
and what to do about them. Whether you just avoid them,
Very charitable.
but perhaps answering a human need. Maybe going back to the days when we were fighting for food and resources, fearing the tribe up the road.
Actually.
It's certainly changed a lot with evolution, and you could argue we are still changing it even now with things like social media. It's engineering changes in the brain, whether intentional or by sheer fluke. We are changing our own brain structures as time goes on with the weird things we get up to.
Yeah.
Not to mention strange diets and weird substances. Press the wrong thing there.
That's a kind of worm, is that one?
Emil. Oh yes, horses, pigs. Quite a lot of animals like getting drunk. Pigs and horses, the most common.
Pufferfish, no, dolphins throw pufferfish about because when they do
Get high on the toxins. Yep. We are not the only stoners on this planet. That's another element that Ninian Smart argues, that religion orients itself to alternate states of consciousness. Getting people into a different state of mind is part and parcel of what religions do. Again, pretty much all religions do that. Emile Durkheim was a French sociologist. Started quite influenced by Karl Marx, but started coming up with ideas of his own and pulling away from a lot of what Marx said. He was fascinated by religion. Karl Marx was not fascinated by religion. So this is one of their big kind of,
invisible trap.
yes,
Yeah.
it's a way of keeping the poor poor and the rich rich. But then he thought about everything. That was his kind of one answer fits all questions approach.
That's why questions on who are the best.
You say the same thing, no matter. So his interest, Durkheim's, was in functionality. Functionalism was his philosophical stance on most things, religion included. So the idea is to ask. It goes all the way back to Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. Ask of each thing, what does it do? And so when you're faced with a religion, as an academic study, somebody carrying out research and study, you ask, what does it do? What does this religion do for the people who follow it? What does it do for wider society? And there may not be one neat answer to that. It may do 56 different things, of course. It may not just do the one thing. It may do lots of things. Well, that is Marx's argument, that religion is control. It's a way of keeping the poor in their place. That fits better with large-scale religion than it does with tiny tribal religion. So if you've got a religion practiced by a tribe of people halfway up the Amazon, difficult to argue that's about control. Whereas a religion practiced by millions, if not billions, you can certainly see elements of control coming into that.
Very few, I'm not saying there's none, but very few people are all on equal par.
In any part of the world, ever, anywhere.
So there's always a hierarchy to sort of like somewhere. And that's the one line of truth, eh?
And certainly the establishing of hierarchies is part of what religions do. What it believes is of less interest to Durkheim than what it does. So a religion that preaches one thing and does another, his interest would be in what it does rather than what it preaches. Because like individual people, religions en masse don't always follow their own guidelines. They may say, do this, do that, and then they go off and do something else entirely. And that's what Durkheim wants to know about. What do they do, not what do they preach? Not the theory, the practice. That's where his approach sits. If you want to put that in theological terms, it's orthopraxy rather than orthodoxy. Practice rather than belief is, for him at least, the key issue of interest. So the quote there is from Durkheim himself: a religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. And this is one of his big issues. sanctity. We'll come back to that in a second. That is to say, things set apart and forbidden. Beliefs and practices which unite in one single moral community called a church, except, of course, they don't all use that word church. They use other words as well, but we'll stick with church for the moment because that's the term that Durkheim used. All those were dear to them. So partly it's about community building for him. It's about getting a bunch of people and saying, you lot are all part of one community. You're all Hindus, you're all Buddhists, you're all Sikhs, you're all Druids, you're all whatever you are. You lot are together. You are part of this community. And this is what we do in this community. We do this on a certain day of the week, and we do that on a different day of the week, and we eat this way, and we dress that way, and we treat each other in this way, and we treat those funny people up the road in a slightly different way. These are our guidelines. This is what makes us us. It creates community. Durkheim argues that without religion, there's a significant struggle to form community. And particularly, he died round about the First World War, give or take a few years. So for him, the modern secular age was only just starting when he was gasping his last. So had he lived a few years longer, he might have had quite a lot to say about the secular age as the power of the churches dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And you get multicultural religions, you get people following various different mystical offshoots here, there, and everywhere, and a lot of people who claim to be either atheist or agnostic or just none of the above, and don't hold any particular set of beliefs. They don't go to a particular building once a week. Maybe they do Christmas and Easter, but that's just so they can eat chocolate and open presents. There's no greater context to it than getting stuff. And that leads to debates post-mortem after his death. Is materialism itself a kind of religion? Where instead of going to a church once a week, you go to the shopping centre once a week, and instead of putting money in the collecting plate, you put it in the till as you buy and buy and buy and buy and shop and shop and shop. Is this for some people their defining communal identity? That instead of saying I'm Catholic or I'm a Shia Muslim or I'm a Sunni or I'm a this, I'm a that, they say, well, I shop in Primark, I shop in Bon Marché, I shop in wherever, and that becomes their label, is their identity. Is this the modern cult? So there's a chap called Zizek, who argues, Slavoj Žižek, he argues that commercialism very much is the modern day cult. That once upon a time people wore crucifixes, or they wore the Star of David or whatever was relevant to their particular faith. These days we wear designer labels, and that's who we are. We have a notion that the people who wear that kind of a label are that kind of a person, and those others are with that different label, well, they're different types of people. So that they're the down market and the up market identities that go with fashion labels. Certainly, if you look at advertising, a lot of it is based on this very notion that Zizek argues, that you're not just buying a pair of trousers, you're not just buying a handbag or a pair of shoes, you're buying an identity, you're buying a lifestyle. And you will somehow mysteriously end up like the glamorous models in the TV adverts. For 5 minutes, you'll feel like you're one of these glamorous people on TV that you see with all of these goodies. Yes.
What is that? Where do they want to take us if we wear perfume in a complete fantasy?
I don't know, because it's something, I think, speaking from my own point of view, I mean, I have a weakness for perfume, but that is something that's long lasting, you know, it's not something that you don't buy one and then sell it, go and get another. It's something that,
So do you go by the adverts and all that?
oh, no. Well, yeah, normally somebody else, I'll say, oh, you smell What have you got on? And they'll tell me. And
So why are they spending millions on these absolutely?
because that's not, you know, because it works.
Is
in
that,
America,
is that
doesn't
how young people?
it? Yeah, it works for
But then
very
again,
well.
in the 70s, I think they did sort of.
It's always been the case, so yeah. Or design the labels, I think. Perfume had its very status.
So that comes back to when they were smelling covens.
Yes, well, I guess so. Maybe, but I suppose it kind of heightens the senses, does it? Or dulls it, actually, in many cases. I think perfume does dull the senses, but people think if they smell nice, you know, that they will radiate nice aura of themselves. And then people will say, well, I tried that perfume, and as soon as I've worn it about an hour, I can't smell it anymore. And I thought, yeah, that's because everybody else can. You know, it numbs your senses.
News blind.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in that because of that very odd thing. You know, it's not in my character to be like that with anything else. But I have got, you know, the sensitivity to it, I suppose. Not maybe. Well, no, I haven't. I think, well, we must smell him, it's okay. Interesting one. I always think it's not. Do you like perfume? Not yeah, covering up other things. Yeah. Cigarette used to be cigarettes as well, didn't it? You know, quick spray after you had a cigarette.
Yeah, they would be that, yeah.
Sorry, I digress.
But then again, smoking was, it's,
Well, that's an interesting one. That whole,
yeah.
sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
but that whole thing about you're a part of a group, you're a part of a community.
Yeah,
And if you don't smoke and you're the odd one out, you're not really a part.
No,
and they
that
don't
is-
quite understand
that cannot be the case. And I found that very, very bizarre. Like saying to somebody, would you like a cigarette? And no, thanks. I used to smoke. Oh, come on, have one. And then that person might take it and they'll say,
Led them astray.
It's strange to.
it's a strange code.
So if religion is trying to sort of put a sense of community, now we have all these choices. Is that what's weakening religion? That we have choices?
Zizek argues that we are not good with too many choices.
Mm.
You know, if you go to the supermarket and you've got a choice of 3 things, it's straightforward. If it's a choice of 33 things, you stand there and dither for an eternity looking at.
But if you look overall worldwide, we are not, the religion is not dropping, Christianity is dropping.
In the West,
Even
yes.
religion is not. In the West, we're seeing a lot of secularization, but it's mainly Christianity going down and the others coming up.
Yes.
Unless you're Putin.
Yeah.
It's just blessed, doesn't it? Bizarre.
Not sure by who. Durkheim argues that religion has those 3 functions. The sacred and the profane is an idea you find in variant contexts. So it's different in Shintoism in Japan. They talk about purity and pollution rather than sacred and profane, which similar ideas, maybe not exactly the same, but certainly similar, that certain places are holy places, like a church or a temple or a mosque. Certain objects, like a book or a crucifix, you feel those vampire films, wavy crucifix in here. Certain things have sanctity to them. Maybe in some cases, certain people have sanctity to them. The assumption that it's somehow worse to murder a nun than to murder a traffic warden. That some people are more holy, more revered than other people are because of what they do. And by contrast, that which is not sacred is arguably profane, which doesn't necessarily mean it's to be treated like rubbish, just that it is of a lesser order than the things which are sacred. the particular days, the particular places, the particular objects, the particular people that have to be treated in a way.
It's just keep them in order, keep
Well-
them pure, keep them this. It's get on. Humans can't, so they have to be put in order.
Too many of us, this is the trouble. Durkheim and Freud, who had a very similar sort of an idea when it comes to matters of sanctity and profanity, argued that this, Freud uses the term taboo, that certain things are held to be taboo, either in the sense that you should never do them, or in the sense that you should treat them with great reverence. And that if you take them lightly, such as having somewhat rude cartoons about certain religious people, that becomes profane because you've treated it in a shallow fashion. You've treated it as an object of ridicule. There's long before we had all of the hoo-ha with Charlie Hebdo and all the rest of it. An Italian semiotician, a theorist who used to dead now, write about religion a great deal, Umberto Eco, wrote a book called The Name of the Rose, which was made into quite a good film for once, with Sean Connery. It's all about monks. It's a murder mystery set in a monastery around about the 12th century, thereabouts. And try not to spoil the plot too much for you in case you haven't seen the film or haven't read the book.
So you'll be watching films.
We saw bits of it, yes. Without telling you who the killer is, they are a person who is very concerned that religion is going to be mocked and ridiculed, and wants to find out the individuals who are going to do that and bump them off before they get a chance to ridicule religion. So the killer sets a trap to lure people in who are of a mocking nature, let's put it like that.
Bible John.
Kind of, but slightly more graphic. So it turns upon this notion of blasphemy and mockery, and it explores ideas from medieval Christianity, but also ideas from ancient Greece, and contrasts them, because you've got Aristotle on the one hand arguing about the importance and the sanctity of laughter and why it is important to have a good laugh, and the medieval monks on the other hand arguing that laughter is the mockery of God, and if you start mocking one thing you'll end up mocking everything, and it becomes this sort of slippery slope towards blasphemy, which clearly, given more recent events, you do see re-echoed in other religions as well, where there is a sense that you better not laugh at this particular thing, or else you are beyond the pale. You've done something unforgivable. Other things maybe you can laugh at, but not this. Certain things are off the table when it comes to humour and mockery.
If you think you've got a very special relationship, even a personal relationship with your God, you probably wouldn't, would you? Because it'd be like mocking part of your family. So I think that is what should make one respectful, but not to the point of
Killing people.
Shut if you're not.
Yes. It's a very heavy-handed way of.
The book or movie you were talking about, what's it called?
Name of the Rose.
Name of the Rose.
Very good book. Movie's not too bad either. TV series was rubbish.
Surely then it's a sort of an entwined love, say a religion that you're protecting.
Yes.
But then shouldn't that just be yours, and you shouldn't have to protect it as long as you know where you are? Why do you fight for other people? Why are you offended by other people? If you don't think that,
What
or you
Durkheim,
don't have doubts.
that is part of it, but what Durkheim is emphasizing is that for umpty thousand years, religion has been very tribal in nature, where practically everybody in your community would have worshipped the same gods, done the same rituals, followed the same observances. And it's only quite recently that we're having this experience of lots of people who don't believe in anything and meeting people who believe in completely different things on your doorstep. So you don't have to travel to a far distant country. You just walk to the end of the street and there's somebody who believes in a different religion. or no religion. And so what used to be a way of defining your community is now no longer a way of defining your whole community. So it's not that everyone who lives in this village believes the same thing. This person in this house believes one thing, that person in the house next door believes a different thing. So what binds you as a community? And Durkheim, he wasn't arguing against multiculturalism because it wasn't really a thing when he was alive anyway. But he is suggesting that part of the clash between religions is that it's as much about preserving community as it is about getting into a punch up over whose book is the holiest book or anything like that. It's this community threatens the existence of that community. And there's a wish for one of them to be the winner on both parts.
And like that's the whole thing that religion teaches you that you should. We're all. So why are we fighting?
Well, Christianity teaches that we're all one.
Mm.
Buddhism teaches that we're all one. Not all religions have taught that over time, because a lot of religions, if you go back into the past, a lot of religions were just about your tribe. You didn't give the monkeys what the tribe 50 miles away believe. They can worship whatever they want. They're over there. We're here.
It's monotonous, is the word for something religious.
Are you thinking monotheism,
Yes.
which is the belief in one deity?
Yeah, it was after that started that we started to have a sense of one.
Yes, that there is only one God, therefore everyone's got to worship the same God.
And we're all one group worshipping him.
Yes.
But only after that did that began.
So the argument there is that humanity is one group, whereas the earlier argument was that our group is our group and that group is some other group. They worship their gods, we worship our gods. There wasn't really the wish to convert. Whereas when you get the notion that there is only one truth, then you get the wish to convert other people to it. Because if they believe something differently, well, they're wrong, clearly. Because there is only one truth and it's this. That's what leads to the clash.
That's what I thought I might find a truth when I started doing all this through the years of it. So no, not one.
Yeah, but the basic
multiple.
teaching in many religions is that your truth is just as valuable as their truth.
Yes.
The problem is people that don't. The problem is people that morph religion to fit what they want it to fit, and they don't. Because religion isn't meant to be patrolling. It isn't meant to be a trap. It's meant to be at least more. I'm more Catholic. I'm not like 100% Christian. Blah 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 blah. We see it as actually it's the Protestants that see it as more of a suggestion, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Like we see it more as something you should abide by. But even like we're more liberal. Like my mom has taught me more of like it's not something you need to live by, but it's something you should let it guide your life in a way. But the basic learning is that, and she's always taught me. My mom, she's read the Quran, she's read the Bible. She's always taught me, and that she was taught that although our religion is not the same as theirs, they have just as much right to their religion. I mean, she even said to me when I was younger, to make it easier, like imagine that there is only really one God, but we all call him different things.
Which is pluralism, an idea we largely derive from India.
My mom's 53.
The pluralist argument is very much that to put it, the imagery often used in Hinduism and Buddhism is of a mountain with lots of different roads going up the mountain. So you all end up in the same place eventually, no matter which route you go up, which does avoid the conflicts, or at least it should in theory. Although the history of India is a history of many, many, many conflicts. So it doesn't necessarily pan out in practice. The arrival of pluralism in the West is fairly recent. And we're still not quite really coming to terms with the idea that you can have lots of different religions and let other people get on with it without turning around and saying, no, you're wrong. And you need to be converted to the one truth. Pluralism argues that there are many truths. As you say, the same deity, but different names, or a variation of the theme at any rate.
Just try and describe it that day.
Therein is the problem.
It might be thinking of the same Well, they might think they're thinking the same, but they're not, aren't they?
It becomes, are they indeed?
Why are we taught then when we grow up that there's always just, you know, it's the first, it's the one, it's the sort of like the top. Why is this always somewhere we want to reach?
Um,
Because we
It's,
just don't want to be slaves anymore. I don't know, you know.
I'm not sure per se it's about slavery, because that's a whole separate question. And our understanding of slavery is today very, very different from what it's been for 20,000 years now. The idea of going upwards, there are a lot of religions that have sacred mountains, and the idea that places which are physically very high have a holiness to them. You could argue, I can't remember his name, but there's a guy who used to live in Suffolk at one point that wrote books about sacred mountains. And part of the argument there is that obviously the higher you go up, the thinner the oxygen becomes, and you start to have rather trippy experiences as you get high up because of the impact of the oxygen on your brain. So you can understand why people climbing up a mountain and go as they got halfway up might interpret that as a mystical experience. It may also shift your mind into an altered state of consciousness, so you become more receptive to the mystical. It's comparatively rare to find a religion that wants to go deep down to the sacred places. Yes, they tend to go up rather than down. Climb up a tree or climb up a mountain or climb up whatever to have that experience of altitude. So the imagery is open to a whole raft of debates in itself, but
Is that because we all feel these little tiny heads?
possibly, because you can, which is not a question Durkheim ever wishes to contemplate. But no, but you could, if we were coming at this as theologians, the question would be one of truth. Do we believe this because it is true? Does nearly every culture on the planet believe there is a soul because there is a soul, and it's just a universal truth that's being recognized? Durkheim doesn't address those questions. He's only interested in what function do these beliefs serve, rather than are they true or not. And the function, he argues, of sanctity and profanity is what you were saying earlier, to give structure, to organize, to say you can do this, this, and this, but you mustn't do that, that, or that. And it sets guidelines, it sets perimeters, and some of it may be quite practical. Rules against incest and so on have practical bases to do with inbreeding and emotional harm and all the rest of it, which is why almost every culture on earth discourages incest. So you can give a practical basis to some of it. But other elements, like why can you not do this on a Friday, but you can do that on a Monday, which feel quite arbitrary. Durkheim argues, well, yes, they are arbitrary, but it's about defining your community. We do this on a Friday, those weirdos do it on a Tuesday, but we do it properly, we do it on a Friday. And so it's the Friday is arguably arbitrary, but it's what we do, and that's the function. So it wouldn't really matter if you all went and did it on a Thursday, as long as you all do it on the same day. That's the point. You do it this way. That makes you a community, and you are different from those other people who do it a slightly different way. So it becomes, the function is to identify, to bind people together, rather than practical functions like the injunctions against incest and so on.
Is soul just an emotional? Because nobody can understand emotions and where they come from. So therefore the soul is some enigma.
Most religions don't really define what a soul is, they just talk about it. They don't attempt to offer a clear definition.
To sort of,
I hope not, because every single emotion can be linked to a chemical, and I'd hate to think that the soul is just something my brain's creatively doing.
Reacting, yes.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Most feelings are actually chemical reactions. And I would hate to think that the soul is just something the brain is made up to make you feel better.
It's this is one of the challenges of a secular society. Are we just chemical soup? And therefore what we think and what we feel is of no more consequence than
STCC said it, he's a minister.
So the binding is part of that function, and it overlaps. It's setting rules, almost you could argue for the sake of having a rule, to get people to do the same thing at the same time in the same way. Because it's the sharing of experience that's important rather than the nature of the experience. It's the fact that you all do it together. So you all eat fish on that day, and you all eat meat on another day, and you all eat fast on another day. What you do is less important than the fact that you all do it together. At least this is Durkheim's point of view. Clearly, if you talk to someone from within a religion, they'll give you a more specific reason why we do this on this day. It's because God said this, and that story said that, and blah, blah, blah. So there's a more spiritual justification rather than a functional justification. And the generation of ritual, in a lot of ritual tracks back to stories and parables, and we do this because in that story this happened. Why do we have little wooden toys in Christmas mangers to reenact the story? Why do we stuff our faces with chocolate eggs to reenact something that's not even in the Bible in the first place? That's really stretching it a bit, that one.
It's pushing the egg out of the chicken or bird.
I mean, I'm not complaining, I like the
But arguably most ritual is done in connection to a story that came first, or at least theoretically it came first. There is this debate sometimes, do you get the ritual and then you just make up a story to justify the ritual? There's a little
And then doing things, it's no different to what we've ever done.
arguably so, yes. There's a story told in Buddhism about the Lama's cat, the Lama being the head of the Buddhist monastery. That 500 years ago, there was a reverend abbot, a Lama of a monastery, who had a favorite cat. And every day he would go off to do his meditation, and the cat would come and sit on his lap. And then sometimes the cat would go around and try and sit on the laps of the other monks, and that would wake them up from their meditations. And after a while, they asked the Lama, could we, during the meditation, could we put a little collar on the cat and tie him to a peg so he stays there and doesn't keep sitting on us and disrupting our meditation? So they did. The Lama gave his permission. And then the Lama died. The cat survived him. And they kept looking after the cat because they loved the Lama. So they loved the Lama's cat. Then the cat died. And they went and got another cat. And for the next 500 years, people had cats in that monastery and pegged them to a wooden peg during the meditation. And 500 years later, no one could remember a damn reason why they did this. And there were 30 different arguments about the significance and the meaning and the symbolism of the cat, because they'd totally forgotten how it started. And so it may be that some rituals, there's no real story to them, you just do it. And then afterwards, some awkward person says, well, why do you do that? And you go, and you come up with the story to justify why you do it. So the ritual came first. But usually the argument is the story comes first and the ritual follows on from the story. But again, the importance of ritual, and you can work this through from sociology to psychology. Most people have a morning ritual. They'll get dressed in a certain way. You know, always put their socks on first, or whatever it is that they do. They'll clean their teeth before they have their morning coffee, or the other way around. They have a format they follow because we are ritualistic beings. We like to do things in a pattern because it saves thinking.
And it also, well, that's,
Thinking is a lot of effort, burns up energy. So it's, you know, if you take the same route to work or to college or whatever every day, you don't have to think about it. And you frequently arrive and think, how did I get here then? With no memory of the journey, because we're on autopilot. And that does literally, I mean, your brain, when you're thinking hard, your brain is burning up calories. So if you can automated thinking burns up fewer calories. So that's why we do so much of our life on autopilot, because it saves thought and it saves energy. We are an energy conserving species, going back to our early roots.
Just ask because until now I felt it was like from the religion meets people, and it was just going, top down. But I just think maybe it works two way that people have the need of reasoning, and as you say, also we do need rules to comprehend a lot of things in simplification, and it's much easier to be a follower than a leader. So it basically responds to human needs, this kind of structure allows you to, and maybe the variations are because there are different ways of explaining things. So, and you may just say, okay, the government provides similar role, but I think it's more of like with religion, maybe now the choice is involved. So you don't really feel a direct control,
No.
you still feel it's more of an interaction, it's your choice. I don't know, it feels more
Yes.
of a natural link and interaction, whereas, so I just really think it's just it may be necessary for human mind to have that set of rules that will explain, the past, the future, the now, in some way.
Well,
And then you just choose what is
Yes.
more likely that suits you in some way.
From saying that, we sort of like after the First World War, when religion started to sort of wind down a bit, depression has come up more and more. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that,
I kind
is
of
that,
link the two.
is that
Absolutely.
basically, instead of believing, we had to believe to try and cut out the thought of why are we here? What is all this about?
It gives,
Religion has covered that and given you a reason to carry on.
yes.
If you haven't got that, then you've got depression and you're going, oh, we live in this universe on this planet. And suddenly we're in this huge thing. We go, oh, and yeah, and that's what's caused the depression.
Yes.
The heightened depression in young people because they haven't got a religious
Grounding. Yes.
grounding. It's existential.
Yeah, going from what she said, do you think that's maybe why the Islamic regime hasn't worked in Iran and that, because they're trying to make religion compulsory in a religion that isn't even meant to be compulsory?
in
It's Iran.
Iran, yeah, oh,
Yes.
sorry, yeah,
It's
that's
an
Iran.
regime, but the Quran itself says that nothing
Should be
within the
choice.
Quran is mandatory, and they refer to it as if it is, like with all the processes going on right now. And do you think that's maybe why the Islam regime didn't work? Because they tried to turn something that's meant to be.
Yes. Politics and religion are seldom happy bedfellows.
Well, they'd had a taste of something else, hadn't they, in Iran, but in other nations it carries on in
I
there.
mean, 40 years ago, Iran looked nothing like it does now.
No, that's right. And I think that's what's made the difference when you sort of stepped into another world. It's very hard to accept the one that's presented to
And then it
you.
goes back to shopping and commerce. And then it's like, two conflicting worlds in a
Yes.
quite basic country, and
Certainly there is a unified factor, and a human nature, you could definitely argue, shapes religion more so than religion shapes human nature. It's a response to our needs rather than an imposition against human nature for the most
Just
part.
think it feels the gap that we have. So
Yes, very much so.
What's it? I've got I'm always quoting him. It's my favourite everyday philosopher, Alan de Botton's religion phrases. Because of the things that you've just described, there's a lot of people who can't believe the basic of it, that there is a God, but he looks at all the good things that religion has done in terms of rituals and practices, comforts and beliefs.
like Robin mentioned that, for instance, Buddha is not God. So I think it's just what it is that people need a role model, you need an example. So you seek some authority, and and religion or education, any system simplifies things, and we need to simplify things in order to reason rationally. So otherwise it's chaos. So I think it just prevents chaos, isn't it? By providing.
It is a large
something
response to
else.
that. And I think you could also, in most cases, argue that if you believe God, goddess, deity, whatever you want to call it, has instructed you to do something, it's out of a sense of love. Whereas if it's government, it's much easier to believe that God loves you than that Liz Truss loves you. And do things. So rather than the government saying you've got to do this, if it's religion saying God wants you to do this, that's easier to follow because it seems like a more positive, more nurturing, more kindly. God wants you to do this for a nice reason, rather than some politician bellowing at you and telling you you've got to do this or else, which becomes dictatorial.
And I suppose there are also more clear consequences when you have a strict system.
Yes.
And here maybe there is a degree of flexibility. I don't know.
Absolutely. Michel Foucault, another French sociologist from the about 20th century in his case, very strange man, but he argues on a much more cynical note that religion gives 24-hour-a-day monitoring on the basis that a lot of people refrain from doing naughty things if they think they're being watched. But if they don't think anyone is watching them, they'll get up to stuff.
God's like the perfect one because God watches you every.
A permanent CCTV camera knowing exactly what you're getting up to every minute of the day. So if you do have someone who has the moral development of a 4-year-old, then it's useful to convince them that even if they rob and steal and murder and God knows, even if nobody else knows what they're doing, God will know what they're doing. And therefore that comes, as you say, with consequences. There will be an aftermath to that, whether in this life or in the next life, karma, hell, whatever, something will happen to them. And even if they think they've escaped human justice, his argument is that it becomes a form of social control to convince people that there is a divine justice they cannot escape, as an attempt to rein them in from doing undesirable behaviors, whether that is cheating on their wife or murdering someone or torturing puppies or whatever. It reins them in if they believe it. If they don't believe it, it's not going to do much good. If they believe it, if you don't believe there's anything watching you except the police officer on the street corner, and that's the only thing that's keeping you well behaved, I'll behave myself whilst the police are watching me, then the instant the police look the other direction, you've got a psychopath on your hands who's going to do whatever the hell they think they will get away with doing. And there's always going to be a certain percentage of the human population that have the morals of an alley cat.
They go, follow this. I know where to go. Because
Kind of.
there is a fear of actually being lonely.
Oh,
in
yes.
this vast thing. So that connects you.
Yep.
Gets your feet on the ground.
It's the ultimate companionship. Even if you've got no humans to talk to, there is always God or whoever it is, whatever name you want to use to talk to, and ancestors and whatever else you believe in.
So it's still really from the first human day.
We are quite, yes. It is a potentially lonely experience being human, especially if your only choice of company is other humans. Wears off that one quite quickly. This is a term, collective effervescence. Bubbliness, life, joy, effervescence, excitement. And Durkheim says, although I know some religious rituals can be very staid, to the point where people start falling asleep on the back pew, but what Durkheim focuses on is the rather ecstatic nature of a lot of religions, where they have festivals where people come together and have a little bit of a wild time. There's singing and dancing and music, and in some religions, the booze flows and the magic mushrooms flow and whatever else flows, and people get off their box and they have this ecstatic out-of-body experience, quite different from a very staid, rather dreary type of service that sometimes you get in religion these days. But this arguably is the reason why the evangelical churches are swelling in numbers, even as the Anglican churches are often struggling for numbers, is because they offer this kind of ecstasy, which you don't always get. I know some Anglican churches certainly do, but not all of them do. Some of them it is a sermon and you kind of sing a few hymns and you go home, and there's not necessarily that feeling of great fervid enjoyment.
Thinking and animals just so actually so humans go, oh, I'm better than this elephant. Actually,
I don't think that I disagree with you. That animals do not have the needs for building. They have different structure, but that they have similar needs. They also need that they need protection. They need buildings. You know,
They have a king, king.
you know.
I mean, the queen bee, she mourns when she loses another bee, and she lives for like a year. They live for 30 days, and she still like sheds a tear.
You could argue the way dogs relate to humans is often there's an ecstatic element. You come home and they're bouncing off the walls with the excitement. That's kind of canine effervescence, if not collective effervescence. The human is almost like their god in a sense, the one they look forward to seeing.
And then you have cats where they're the god.
Yeah. Yes, you worship me, not the other way around.
They were truly in the past.
Mm.
That's still in their brain. No, remember it's cats.
I don't think I remember.
So yeah, you could argue that in terms of what defines a religion, something that has that excitement, that coming together, that thrill, that sense of you're kind of losing your individuality for half an hour, however long it is. Well, this is the debate. Is football a religion? For some people, they kind of treat it almost like it is. And where do you draw the line between what is a religion and what is not? What is something else entirely?
But it's community, isn't it?
Yeah.
We absolutely long community.
We do.
Even when, say England's going to play football, everybody's got their England flags out. There's suddenly a togetherness. The Queen died, suddenly there's a togetherness.
Yep.
And what's more amazing than humans just little standing side by side contently? Wow.
Oh, where? Football or
Football, the Queen's funeral. Look at, and nothing kicked off as far as we know. That in itself, that so many people turned up and were there for one common purpose, is absolutely, really.
Yeah.
In this day and age, we're on it that
it was to our expectations, but I think that's because there's a lot of things we're not aware of. We don't really know how many people feel a lot of the time, because I think that's what goes in politics.
Your next lecture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true in politics, isn't it? Is when they assume, they do these polls and things, and people aren't truthful about them, and then they have an election or they have a vote, a referendum, and it's not quite what they expect.
Get something else instead.
Quite the opposite of what they expected, because we don't really know much about other people's communities. I mean, we might do, if there's still a lot of religious practices going on. But as Robin has said, a lot of it has been changed now by having the evangelical and the traditional. And we're all so far apart in communities, we don't really latch onto that, do we? You know,
Yeah, that's part
people's
of the
lifestyle.
challenge. Yes, it's what bind if you don't. And again, it is Durkheim's, but if you don't have religion to bind you together, what do you have?
Often work, I suppose, it's one thing. Work, it's but no,
But someone, say on the tube or on the train, you're such a lonely individual on a train, aren't you? You get
Especially a British train where you get to hide behind newspapers and masks and not talk to anyone.
it's really, there's nothing.
If you want to
it's
sit
like-
next to them.
It's a really, really peculiar thing. And yet everybody does it every day. They see the same person every day and they never say hello.
I did notice the other week I was on a train, and it seems to me a post-COVID thing. Everyone was sitting by themselves. No one wanted to sit next to anyone.
I love that because I always hated it.
I think that's right.
It's almost like COVID gave that official permission
To be rude.
or, yeah, to isolate. I don't know.
Yes. Which I don't think is healthy in the long run, but it's certainly, yeah.
So when you get on the phone in the morning and you see people that is there any, hello, morning there?
No, I recognise them, and I dare say some of them at least will probably recognise me. I know you come on this train, this particular train, a lot, but there's no smiling, there's no nodding, there's no hello, no exchange of names. You do, which you could argue in terms of community
Yes,
is a form of community of
Yeah,
chatting
it
to other
really
dog
is.
walkers. I should emphasise that Durkheim is not saying religion is the only form of community, just that it is and has been for 20,000 years a dominant form of community. So if you get rid of it, you are then faced with the challenge: what do we now bind people together with instead? And it won't just, he says, it won't just kind of miraculously happen, fall out the sky. You've got to, as a community, think, well, what are we going to do to bring people together? If we're not going to do that, what do we do?
But I wonder if maybe, I don't know if the community and the binding element is the key feature of religion, because I think maybe it's more about identity and belongingness rather than, physically belonging to a community. Personally,
It does
I
become
never
similar,
needed
yes.
people around me in the church to feel I belong, like that I have the connection with God. So I did not need, a sense of community.
Yes.
And still I felt I was part of that religion. So I think it's like to me, it's secondary.
He's coming at it as someone who doesn't have the belief system. He just looks at it as a social function, which is why perhaps he doesn't get the sense of spiritual belonging. He's just looking at it as a more of a practical, physical practice.
it's taken a long time. I mean, the spirituality is quite strong.
Yes.
If you look at it as physical, then obviously you will have a competition for a religion. You have other systems, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
people and everything else.
Yeah.
If that was about just binding element,
Absolutely.
alternatives.
And there are alternatives, but I suppose the debate from Durkheim's point of view is, do any of them do the job as well, as efficiently as religion does? And we are now also, particularly with the uprise of Christianity and Buddhism and later Islam, seeing what's usually referred to in theology as universal religions. So that you could, as a Christian, you could go from America to Russia or somewhere and find churches everywhere. And even if they're talking different languages, you'll recognize the practice, the ritual, the priest stands up, does this. So you can, even if you don't know a single person in that church, you can participate. And so it gives you a universal community. Whereas back in the day when it was tribal religions, you walk 20 miles up the road to a different tribe. you don't expect to find the same gods, the same practices. So that religion then was quite geographically located, rather than a universal presence that you'd find the same gods worshipped everywhere.
But also, I think it strengthens your own individual meaning in the world. If
Yes.
you can, be here and there. So maybe systems like, all or other types of communities do not have that long-term binding effect. So I think that could be
Yes,
they are just,
short-term.
temporary. The dynamics
Yes.
change, and therefore you can change. Whereas religion may provide some more stable.
Yes, it's usually a lifelong phenomenon for most people at any rate. This notion of directing effervescence outwards, he argues that some places, some objects become symbolic representations of that sense of awe and wonder. So like the Turin Shroud, things that people go to see or places people go to on pilgrimage. He argues, is it actually something innate to the shroud or to the building or to the whatever, or is it more that it's a state of mind within ourselves, but we feel the urge to go and experience that state of mind in certain places or in front of certain objects? So it may, or a devout Catholic might say that shroud is there is an awe, a magic, a presence in the shroud, whereas Durkheim might say shroud is just a piece of material. It's the expectation that triggers the sense of awe and wonder and amazement that people might experience standing in front of the shroud. So is it internal or external? Probably a bit of both, but he focuses more on the notion that this is an internal experience of the person that they are projecting out onto places and objects, but that practically every religion does it and encourages it. That certain places, certain things, certain buildings, etc., are especially holy and especially sacred. The bit about the priestly caste fits in with what you were saying earlier about hierarchy. Not all religions, the Quakers obviously don't have a priesthood, but most religions have somebody who you could describe as a specialist. Whether you'd call them a priest or you'd call them something else maybe, but a person who is expected to know a lot more about the religion than Joe Bloggs does. The person who's meant to be the guru, the one who knows about ritual, who knows about calling upon divine power, conducting services, doing this, doing that, doing the other, and devotes themselves full time to religion. Whereas everybody else is busy plowing the fields, collecting firewood, building houses, looking after the kids. There is someone whose job is determined to be, right, you can be the one that does the religious stuff. You can be the coordinator.
Are we they pass away by going through tradition and being in love with tradition, and which now is turned tradition, isn't it? History, and we're still so pulled back on our basic roots of environment.
Absolutely, yes. And religion is primarily about the preservation of tradition. That's a huge function of religion. If we're thinking in terms of functionalism, that's largely what it does. It preserves histories, preserves stories, preserves places. It's very much about preservation.
When lost farming as farming was, when sort of like, and the trains came, and everything changed. And you lost tradition.
Some of it, yes, absolutely. And a lot of traditional law got lost with the Industrial Revolution, particularly the breakup of rural communities, farming communities.
And some farms weren't needed.
And people had to find other jobs, so they went to the cities and didn't see as much of their relatives. Things started to unravel. And therein is a bit of a debate how religion reacts to the Industrial Revolution is in itself a topic. One of the ideas that Max Weber starts to develop, working with similar ideas around the sacred and the profane, is that our understanding of a religion and what is important in that religion reflects our understanding of what is important in society. And where you've got a society that is mostly made up of one religion, that society and the religion are practically the same thing. They're practically hand in glove. So if you feel that God is very judgmental and harsh, then you will expect society to be very judgmental and harsh, the courts to be judgmental and harsh, the king to be judgmental and harsh. You'll expect that to be reflected. Whereas if you expect God to be compassionate and kind and caring, then you will want the same of society. You will want a society that's kind and caring. And obviously there's not just those two ways, there's lots of other ways to conceive of the divine. But he's arguing, Weber, that there is this sort of God, or the gods, are not so much actual beings as symbols of what a society holds to be important. So if God is a God of justice, it's because society holds justice to be a godlike quality. If society believes that God is merciful, it's because that society holds mercy to be a godlike quality. And so it's what is expected of the hierarchy. Whether they give it or not is another question, but it's what is expected of them. Again, he's coming at this as someone who doesn't really believe in religion per se, and is only looking at it as a set of functions rather than a set of eternal truths. So clearly a religious person would say, well, God does exist and this is what God is like, as opposed to God is a metaphor for society, which is what the sociologists are arguing. So it's a slightly different approach, but you could say in both cases, the religion, the virtues that are important to a religion will pan out in that society, because you can't keep it boxed up as somehow your religion is over here and society is over there. There's got to be an overlap between the two. Yes, a life of service and care in the community and helping other people and looking after the elderly, and that which is valued in a religion pans out.
The crossover in Cropfield is definitely the churchgoers that the traditional WR, and they'll go to church, and then the younger people that we promote in are then sort of being pulled into more church things, which people that are younger wouldn't in a million years done without that connection, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say they won't join it because it is too.
Cheap.
There's with that, you're expected to be good at something. And then there's this fear of not being acceptance because you're not good enough. Those aren't ironed properly, or you can't make a cake that rises that much. But there's all that expectation of, you know, but then you're
Bringing your
good
best.
and, you know, providing good things and you're behaving in a proper way.
I suppose you could make the argument that most religions have the idea of what you might call the Sunday best, that whatever you do for God should be the best you can do, rather than, oh, that'll do. It should be, you know, whether it's your best clothes, your best cake, your best whatever, that you put more into that. Those were the
And
days.
dressed perfectly. You're not sitting properly. Your legs I agree with that.
And nice young men too. So one of the questions then becomes the very thing about football. There are activities like sport which have the passion, the fervour, the effervescence. You turn up on a certain day, you're wearing a certain outfit, waving your scarf in the air. You're cheering for your lot against the other lot. There are activities that involve religious-like qualities to them, but which we would probably not want to call religion. And the difficulty becomes working out what the difference is. So having already said Buddhism as an example of a religion with no God, well, football has no God.
But it takes you through to the next week. It takes you through to the next season.
Yes.
It takes you through to a lifetime. It's passed on to son.
Yep.
To grandson.
Yep. So that in some respects, they are like religion, but we generally speaking don't call them religion because, well, that becomes the question, why? What is it about them that is not religious?
Well, it does not provide you with a set of moral rules, you know.
Certainly never used to, but could we argue that this, taking the knee for Black Lives Matter type stuff
Yeah.
in football is now starting to bring in morality? So it's no longer just about kicking a ball. It's now you've got to be anti-racist, anti-sexist, this, that, the other.
It could be a medium or, something through which the religion can come through.
Yes.
But to me, it's still not a religion.
And not to most people, I think. The trouble for people who are great admirers of Durkheim is they get themselves tied in a knot by trying to explain why football is not a religion when it does have certain things in common with religion.
Because maybe with religion is that even like with football, there are events, people meet at the pub, you celebrate the events. You said like you live from one week to another, but that there will be, I don't know, Sunday evening, you may feel lost. Football will not always help you,
No.
but with the notion of religion and living in like or agreeing with set of rules, it may really help you. I don't think that football can always help you like with with complex sometimes problems in life.
Not going to be much use if you've got a moral dilemma.
Yeah. So with ethics,
Yes.
there is a gap there.
There's a thing that religion is always supposed to be good for you morally. And say in football, they'll go, yeah, that footballer didn't treat his wife, he shouldn't have treated like. So they're learning morals from people in it. So there
Yes.
are sort of morals in it.
In example.
It would never be in your mindset to think that, but for them, in their mindset, they're thinking, oh, and they get guidance from, because they're saying I mean, that's the hooligans in that word. In the 70s was ridiculous, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously the 90s, I think the 90s was the last sort of really bad. I mean, it's now sort of like no, people ain't allowed to go to places and all that's been knocked out. But that's pent up anger. That's not just about football, that's about angry young people lost basically and just losing their heads.
Yes.
There's so much more behind that fighting.
Hardly anything to do with football, really. The football is an excuse at the end of the day for a punch up.
One definition for religion in sociology. Durkheim names it as like wait. Yeah, he speaks about the profane and the sacred. Yeah, but
Yes.
no, that wasn't it. How it has a function, sorry, that's the one. How it has a function, like a psychological or a physical function. But I can't remember who it was, but there's the other, I think it's a substantive or something definition of religion, says that religion is actually something that worships gods or something supernatural.
Yes.
So
Which is clearly missing from football.
Yeah. It depends on what definition you want to look at.
And that is the thing, that everybody's perception of everything is different. So someone into football thinks their perception of Beckham is sort of like some sort of god because he can bend a ball in a certain way. So yeah, it seems ridiculous to sort of say it in the mind of someone who's into football. That is their god. That is their sort of.
Well, it's more like an idol. So it's so football can be compared more also to music. like music unites
Absolutely.
people in some way. So I think it's just another way of defining your own identity
Yeah,
and
yeah.
satisfying that need of belongingness
Yeah.
somewhere. So it's
Yeah,
just
it's all-
another feature.
It's all
It
tracked down to
is-
the individual.
But you can't, you don't call music
A
a
religion.
religion.
Yeah.
And even though I think it can help you, it still does not contain a point of reference, like
Yes.
a set of rules
No.
which can guide you in, when you don't know what is right or wrong. So maybe that element actually still matters,
Yes.
Um,
So you do have the effervescent element, you get rock concerts and things like that, people
Yeah.
just kind of losing themselves in the crowd, but possibly country and western lyrics. Stand by your man and all.
It's not good when they're the first ones you think.
No, some songs have a moral thing to them, but absolutely the majority don't. So the majority do lack that sort of ethical guideline, and
Oh, that's just poking your emotion.
yeah. Usually the ones with a moral guideline, it's more of a sort of saccharine sentiment rather than reasoned ethics. Marx makes this argument, which kind of mentioned earlier, that religion, bearing in mind he was writing in the 1840s, 50s, 60s, and so he was thinking about his experiences of the both the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church in Europe, went from Germany to eventually end up in Britain, where he died, booking visits to other countries on the way, was a tool of the state. It was a way of priests and bishops and vicars and what have you allying themselves with the government of the day to support whatever the law of the land was, and a sort of a fusion between politicians and religious leaders to create, from his point of view, a well-behaved society of people who would go and pay their taxes and obey the law and turn up to work on time and do whatever that they were told to do, with the full support of whichever religion, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, that they adhered to. And his very famous quote about the opiate of the masses, to put that into context, when he was writing, opium was understood as a painkiller. So he wasn't saying the drug, the addictive drug of the masses, he was saying the painkiller of the masses. Yes, it's the understanding of opium then. Nowadays, we understand opium in a slightly different way. We have a more in-depth medical. Yeah, we did, yes. Yes, an addictive painkiller. So his argument is you go to church, you sing some hymns, you listen to the sermon, you take communion, and you feel better. Your miseries of being exploited and downtrodden and underpaid and overworked are numbed somewhat. But like taking a headache pill, if your arms are half hanging off, it might take the pain away for a little while, but then the pain comes back. And this is the problem that Marx saw with religion, is that it doesn't take the pain away. Because as far as he's concerned, religion does not, or at least didn't in his lifetime, address the causes of human misery. It supported the kings, the queens, the prime ministers, the various leaders of society in their continued exploitation of the masses, rather than challenging them. So he's like, it just makes you feel a bit better. And really, at the end of the day, like those awful adverts you get on TV for headache pills and stomach ulcer medications, where you've got some man or a woman trying to hold down a busy job and screaming kids and 30 other things, and they're going, oh, I feel so ill, and someone with a very cheesy smile turns up and says, take this pill and you will be able to look after your kids and do your job and get that promotion at work. In other words, keep slogging on, don't stop, don't ask yourself, why do I feel ill? Is it because I'm being burnt to a crisp by an exploitative and abusive system? Just medicate yourself up, shut up, keep going. You probably die a few decades early, but keep going, take some more pills, off you pop. there is that very definite context to a lot of pain-killing adverts that it is, if life is getting too much, drug yourself. Don't ask why life is getting too much, just drug yourself. Keep going.
Humans not really designed for life.
Well, not the way it is today. I do.
Yeah, we're not designed for the life that we built for ourselves. It really mind boggles me. Like we weren't meant to live like this. And why did we do it? We just weren't meant to live like this. It's unreasonable standards.
Well, you know, I get what you're saying. It's how you define this, you know, is this. It's what we're doing that's actually making the difference to, you know, how people seem to cope years ago and aren't coping now. That, you know, in much harder circumstances, it really is quite bizarre. How, you know, people from my generation look back and think we had the golden years and we've gone.
I blame social media.
I think that things are changing. So I just feel like in the past, maybe religions could be more totalitarian, but now because there is a mixture and you are more exposed to choices, and as you say, you can talk to people from different religions. So it's like they police each other, but also because people's awareness is greater. Therefore, I think the religion has to adjust also to expectation or behavior of individuals.
Yes.
So it's not only top down and imposing for the religious leaders to have people. They do have to, you know, include current experiences and respond to current needs. So I think religion is different now. You know,
Yes.
It's you have to evolve to match the needs of the current population. It's just there is no way.
So there is definitely the argument that religion is adapting. Maturo, who is a Marxist, nonetheless, has said Marx was a bit wrong on this one, in that he points out that as in the oh, what's that? Okay, that's going weird. Yeah, it's possessed.
I hate technology.
Oh, right. That's for whatever reason crashed itself. Maturo makes this argument that maybe this is because the world has moved on a lot since Karl Marx's day, that you now get liberation theology as a phenomenon in Central America as a subsidiary of the Catholic Church. Although the current Pope is quite on side, because obviously he is from, is he Argentinian? Can't remember. Yeah. So he's a bit more sympathetic to liberation theology than the last Pope was. He was quite opposed to it.
I think it's the first one, Maureen, but it might have been unplugged on the back or something.
It's shooting.
Oh,
Yeah, magic. So that is a saintly icon of Cardinal Romero, who was shot dead on the steps of his church by some drug gang, local cartel, for trying to help the desperately poor and downtrodden in his parish. And we are talking levels of poverty you just don't see in this country, squalid poverty in the extreme. Liberation theology is a movement within Catholicism, but there are similar kinds of movements in some other religions, which say religion is or should be less about gold thrones and ruby rings and all the rest of it for the popes and the cardinals and the bishops and similar dignitaries, and should be more, especially in Christianity, the message of Christ with the lepers, Christ with the prostitutes, Christ with the the lowest of the low in society. And therefore, liberation theologians want to get with the poorest, most downtrodden, most abused members of society and help them out of the gutter. Not just pat them on the head and say, there, dear, never mind, you'll go to heaven when you're dead, but to try and make their lot in life better by challenging the authorities that are exploiting them, ripping them off, abusing them, doing horrible things to them, to improve the condition of society, to witness for Christ by being with the poor. In other religions, although obviously they don't talk about Christ in other religions, but there are movements in other religions of a similar nature to try and have religion much more about working with the lonely, the desperate, the miserable, the despairing, the people at the peripheries, and less about working with the rich and the well-heeled and the comfortable, and particularly where it's relevant, holding the comfortable to account if their comfort is purchased at the expense of everybody else's misery. Now, I'm not suggesting every rich person is exploiting people left, right, and centre, because that's too much of a pantomime vision of reality. But clearly, some rich people have got rich at other people's expense and other people's misery. And so that liberation approach is addressing that, is saying, maybe in Karl Marx's day, there was a lot of oppression, but liberation theology, which is a phenomenon of the 20th century, has started to address this and started to say religion has a role to play in improving society, in bringing the marginalized groups more into the middle to make their lives better, not just their afterlife, but their physical life better. Obviously, not every single religion is happy and hunky-dory with this approach, but it is spreading as an approach. So it's no longer just the bog standard Marxist view of churches and religions upholding the status quo. There's also a recognition that some churches, some religions challenge the status quo and try to revolutionize society, try to make society better, and almost go back to their roots. If you think about Christianity in the days of the Roman Empire, back then Christianity was very radical. It wasn't about the mainstream, it wasn't about the middle classes, it was about the people in the gutters, it was about the slaves, about the people on the edge. So this is almost like going full circle in a sense, going back to the very, very early days of Christianity.
The local church to me, which was called the West Road Church, which is evangelical, that has it's renamed itself the Bridge.
Right.
Well, I say that, but I think there's there's a chain, a chain of bridges. And I wonder now, I don't know much about it really, but I do know they do look at helping a lot in the community. And I'm wondering if that's the key to the definition of engineering.
Well, that's where the word pontiff comes from, the bridge between God and the people, or God and the church. So the Pope should be, in theory, a bridge. Practice, I'm not sure about the Borgias. Some of the other popes, I'm sure, have done a pretty much better job. Pierre Bourdieu makes the argument that habitus, which is to do with repeated habit, like going to church every Sunday or mosque every Friday or whatever. Religion involves a lot of things you do on a regular basis. So there's a lot of that in his idea of habitus, but it also brings in the notion of power structures, that the beliefs, the routines, the habits not only keep you doing the same thing on a regular basis, but often keep the same people in power by believing that they ought to be in power. So the priest in the congregation, or the imam, or the rabbi, or whoever it is, part of the system of repetition is the teaching that person should be in a position of authority. They have the right, they have the knowledge, they have the blessing from God, or whatever it is that keeps them in a position of authority. And more than that, there's the old early English saying about God put the squire in his station and everyone else. So the rich are rich because God wants them to be rich, and the poor are poor because God wants them to be poor. And if you try to challenge that, you're kind of challenging God. So you need a good slap. Put you back in your place.
Rich man at his castle.
Absolutely. So, and that Buddha's point of view is that religion can be used to uphold hierarchies, not just hierarchies of religion in terms of the bishops and cardinals, but the wider hierarchies of society. Why is the local lord of the manor? Why is he the lord of the manor? Oh, because God wants him to be. God put him there. So you can't challenge that.
Yeah, the divine right.
Yes, absolutely. Or the notion that the Hindu caste system is directly from the gods. And therefore,
with politicians, because quite politicians seem to have kind of a religious leaning, don't they?
Jacob Rees-Mogg is very Catholic.
Who?
Jacob
Oh,
Rees-Mogg.
yes, yeah, no, I was thinking, I've just seen instances of it, you know, where they were talking about their education and what have you, of politicians, and I think some of it is to do with that, you know, is the
Yeah.
education, but you know, still continuing. You know, it's rubbed off on a lot of people who started off being brought up as Christians, but it doesn't seem so much the case in, well, what I gleaned there. Who knows what's
Well,
going
it'd
on
be
there?
interesting to see what happens now that the Queen is not the head of
Yes.
the country with religion. She was religious.
She very much does.
Charles, I think.
Well, no, he will be the head of the church.
Yes.
Right.
I don't know, we have as much faith in Charles. Faith in the Queen of the Church.
You do wonder if they sometimes go about it thinking, I better carry on because of what everyone is.
The done thing. Yes. So Weber echoes that sense of religion often being a key to upholding social institutions and keeping people in their place, encouraging people to obey the law, saying, "Well, God wants you to do this," or "God says you mustn't do that," and that then fusing with the law code and the legal systems, even down to things like in periods of war, where priests and rabbis and imams and what have you are brought out to bless the army before they march off into battle, so that they are effectively fighting in God's cause. Of course, the opposing army is usually doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah, the ones like, you did.
A bit of an iffy one. He went on to write The Protestant Work Ethic, in which he argues that the capitalist system of the West, which was gradually spreading to the East, but mainly centered in the West back in 1905, is rooted in the Protestant work ethic, which itself is rooted in this notion that fun, time off, leisure is deeply, deeply suspicious, because the devil makes work for idle hands. So if your hands are not busy either praying or working, what are you going to get up to? And so they, you know, if you get people hard working and industrious, one of the advantages is that they never have the time to commit sin, because they're just too busy working all the time. So it decreases the dominance of the devil. It challenges that capacity for naughtiness. But just keep them busy constantly. A side effect of this, he says, is that people started to make a lot of money because they were constantly working. And so the growth of nations, the growth of the Industrial Revolution, he feels, is in no small part down to Protestantism and this distrust of pleasure, the distrust of recreation, and the need that if you're not working, you ought to be praying, and if you're not praying, you ought to be working. There should be no time for anything else. None of this drinking and dancing on tables and any of that palaver. Work and pray. That's your lot. Get on with it. Some people have questioned whether it's Protestant or was there this idea around before Protestantism. So there's a bit of a historical debate.
Yes, I can see.
Yeah, Calvinism, absolutely.
It's a good
Which is a
social-
man. Yeah.
It's a good social study, isn't it?
Yes.
You know where that all originates from, so.
You can go all the way back to St. Jerome with a very similar point of view about the devil making work for idle hands. So it's not necessarily only a Protestant thing. He went on to argue for this notion of in a better translation, Talcott Parsons, an American writer, translated it as iron cage, a more closer to the original German translation is steel shell. So the idea of a shell rather than a cage, like a crab shell, tortoise shell. But we won't get bogged down in the linguistics. Weber's notion is that this cage is created by industrialized bureaucratic society, which itself is largely down to the sheer size of the population. When you go beyond living in small villages, you've got huge numbers of people. The only way to manage them is through bureaucracy. Bureaucracy starts turning people into numbers, and people just start to think of themselves as yet another statistic. You lose your sense of humanity in a bureaucracy. You lose other people's sense of their humanity. You just start viewing everyone as a number, a statistic on a page, and you forget these are actually people at the end of the day. When that happens, part of losing your humanity is to lose your sense of wonder in life, your sense of joy, your sense of amazement at how strange and weird and beautiful and amazing life can be, which is not a purely religious phenomenon, but is, or used to be, according to Weber, actively encouraged by religion. To believe in the wondrous, to believe in miracles and in magic, and yes, I may have this disease, but God might heal me tomorrow, and wonderful things might happen. Whereas if you stop believing in any of that, life becomes awfully predictable and rather boring and rather grey. And everything starts to feel like an episode of Scooby-Doo, where everything you think is mysterious turns out to be some bloke in a mask. It's all a bit boring, all a bit humdrum, all a bit same old, same old, same old. And that, going back to what you were saying about the shoot up of antidepressant prescriptions, is arguably why we end up with this sense of growing depression. Now, it may be, historians have suggested, how do we know how many people in the 14th century ought to have been on antidepressants? They just didn't have them. We don't. We've got no idea how many people were severely depressed in the 14th century, because it wasn't even an idea to talk about in the 14th century. But we know now that we have the medication. Touch of the glooms. So can we say, hand on heart, there are definitely more chronically depressed people in 2022 than there were in 1822 or in 1522?
Just because there's more of us now.
Yeah.
And what you're recording.
But we can't say that because we don't have data.
Absolutely.
The thing is that people in the 14th century ones had a purpose, a continuous purpose all day. So if they didn't work, they wouldn't survive. And
Yeah,
now we don't
that's
have,
right.
we
Yeah.
don't have to work
No,
the same
it's
way to
absolutely
survive as they did. So therefore, we've got more time to think.
Yes, it's very difficult to
And
get
don't give people time to think.
Yes.
By the 18th century, things were around about 1850. Everyday house would have a little bit of money to actually buy something to go maybe from a dressing table or something. So suddenly that commerce of having things was built up.
Yes.
And then there's an expectation, and then there's the commerce, and then it just grows, and then it just falls over.
Goes round and round in circles. The term that Weber used was Entzauberung, the loss of magic, the loss of wonder, which he felt was partly down to bureaucracies, partly down to industrial society and bleak landscapes and smog and filth and pollution and noise. A little bit like William Blake bemoaning the dark satanic mills that were building up in the North Country with the Industrial Revolution. And partly down to, he felt, the growth of science explaining everything away. And that losing is life as mysterious when you go, oh, it's that. Yeah.
Much, if you sort of think and look outside the box, there's so much we do not still understand. As you get older, you realise that it's just bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And
so,
in defence of science, Richard Dawkins has argued, even if you do know how rainbows are made, does it make the experience of looking at a rainbow any less wonderful? or any less beautiful, just because you know the scientific process of light refraction.
Jesse, wow. And it is every time it's sunlight. And you always look for the bottom of the rainbow. Oh, where is it? Is that going? Nobody's ever tried to find the end of the rainbow?
It's too far to trace.
Yeah.
Part of this cage, this trap, is the cycle in which you feel tired and burnt out and miserable, and society tells you the best cure for being tired and burnt out and miserable is buy more stuff. So you have to work longer hours to afford stuff, and because you're working longer hours, you feel more tired and more miserable, and you buy stuff, and for about 3 minutes you feel good, and then it wears off, and you go back to feeling miserable again. And so society says, you're still bloody miserable, buy more stuff. And you go round and round and round. And you never get out that cage. What would get us out of the cage? Well, Weber felt that sense of spirituality, that sense of wonder would be the key. Other people like Oliver James have suggested that the real key is meaningful relationship, to have friends, to have family, pets, lovers, so people to whom you are emotionally close, to share real love. Gives you the sense of wonder, connection, rather than stuff. But obviously there's rich people don't get rich on you falling in love. They get rich on you buying stuff. So there is a yes, absolutely. So it's a bit of a trap. Or at least that's Weber's point of view. I'll talk very quickly for the last, well, we'll skip a bit. So in terms of change, whilst Weber at the turn of the 20th century was arguing that the world was becoming more secular, or at least Europe was becoming more secular, other people like Josephine Storm and Luckman says that not really. What's happening is that, as you said earlier, the church has had a bit of a battering in terms of losing numbers of people attending services and so on, but people are still quite interested in spirituality. It's just that they've got more of a eclectic pick-a-mix attitude to spirituality. They'll have a little bit of Hinduism, a little bit of Judaism, a little bit of paganism, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of the other, and they'll mix and match in a way that in the early 1800s they would not have done. But now, because they see on the internet, on their own high street, they see different people, different religions, different ideas, they sort of do a bit of everything. Much like when I was unfortunately teaching stroppy 16-year-olds centuries ago, a lot of them, when you discuss religion, they, oh, I'm not religious, it's all crap, don't believe in any of that rubbish. And in the very next breath, they say, well, I believe in ghosts, believe in aliens. So they do believe, just not in conventional religion. So they have mystical beliefs, but they're of a different order to conventional religious belief.
You had the same experience as me, obviously. They always say, yes, do you believe in God? And I say, well, you tell me what God, you describe God, and they'd say something like, oh, man, blah, blah, blah. That was a lot, and I just think, no, that's actually no. You know, it is. It is very hard when they're just stuck with that idea of what God might be, and you present different ways of looking at it.
Yes.
Is almost, you just haven't got time on the curriculum, really. So
So it may be that we are not seeing a more secular society. It may be society is just as in love with mysticism and magic and religion as it ever was, but it's a much bigger set of beliefs than it used to be. Although even if you go back to the 13th century, there were a lot of strange heresies on offer. So people didn't only stick with the church, they dabbled in a bit of Catharism, a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of the other. People got around even then, so it's not necessarily a brand new thing. But maybe it's a bit more open now, and you don't have to worry about being burnt at the stake if you dabble around a bit.
you just get cancelled.
It's a new version of being burnt at the stake. Have your life destroyed by psychopaths on Twitter. Just to try and finish on a bit more of a positive note. It has been a bit Bit gloomy. Viktor Frankl, who was admittedly a psychologist rather than a sociologist, survived the concentration camps, Jewish psychologist, and came out of it at the end, moved to America from Europe, and proposed that the true joy of life was to find meaning, and not so much find it as create it. You could endure any kind of misery or hardship if you could create a meaning within your life that said, I am here because, I am living because. And for him, it didn't matter too much what your because was, as long as there was one. The people who felt that life was meaningless, pointless, none of it really mattered, they were the ones who suffered mentally and went downhill very quickly when things went wrong in their life. The ones who could say, this is what my life means, art, music, love, religion, whatever, they had a center which helped them to resist and be resilient to the dreadful things of bereavements, grief, hardships, disease, all sorts of things that might happen to them. They could resist it. That gave them purpose to keep getting up in the morning because they felt life was purposeful. It wasn't just one random, stupid, pointless thing after another. It was meaningful, which could be in a religious context, but equally he said it could be in all sorts of other contexts. You might believe you're here to create art, you're here to make the lives of the poor better, but whatever, doesn't terribly matter as long as you have purpose, you have meaning. And so for him, religion is a form of reflecting upon and trying to create collective meaning rather than individualistic meaning, but meaning nonetheless. It's saying life is purposeful. It's not just pointless. You're here for a reason. You're doing stuff. You are valued. And that's part of having a sense of meaning. You could say part of having a community is that you mean something to your community. The whole Christian argument that every soul is valued, which at the time it was introduced to the world was quite a radical idea, in that a lot of other belief systems didn't necessarily say everyone is important. Some people were important, the emperors, but not everyone was important. Some people were irrelevant. So that came in as quite a radical overhaul, the notion of individual importance. Even if you are as poor can be, your soul is valued. And so that sense of being not only here for a reason, but your very existence being valuable is perhaps arguably one of the key sociological, psychological, whatever you want to call it, benefits that religion and spirituality in the much broader sense provide. It gives a sense that this is purposeful, that my existence has value to somebody's, even if, you know, I don't talk to half my family and my friends have all died or something, someone somewhere up there cares.
And wrote it down at the end for us to put on the question.
Hopefully.
I think it's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. You kind of neatly gone all the way around psychology, sociology, and religion, and the links in them.
Bit of everything.
Yeah.
But this is, again, the notion of meaning is which you can is linked to religion, because the religion can offer you that.
Yes.
And but I think the reason it's so important is because when you experience that sense of meaning, then you have a direction, and therefore you have like inner drive, and you can act. Nobody has to tell you. You may seek some, guidance,
Yeah.
but you will find like self-motivation. That there is a lot of things that can stem from you just because of your belief in meaning in the world.
Absolutely. And certainly Frankl argues you become a better person. You become a kinder person if you have a sense of meaning in your own life. That sort of shapes how you then treat other people.
Striving to fulfill that meaning, and
Yeah.
through that process, maybe you just So,
Absolutely. What we haven't really addressed, and I don't think we need a lot more than 2 hours to address it, is whether all religions have a similar function, or different religions have quite specific, unique functions to them.
You just kind of what the thing we're trying to get at.
It's a tricky subject, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It's a big
It
module,
could be,
one after the
yeah, I believe
Yeah,
the functions may differ.
I think so, yes. And certainly Foucault, we mentioned earlier, having been brought up a Catholic, although he wasn't practicing it as an adult, but he was brought up as a Catholic, made arguments around things like the confessional as being a very unique function to Catholicism, which you don't find in Islam, you don't find in Judaism, you don't find in Buddhism. Well, ish in Buddhism, but ish. So some religions offer specific functions which other religions just don't consider relevant, don't think about. So there are going to be elements in common, like they all do ritual, they all talk about the meaning of life, they all talk about ethics, but some of them do things which are very peculiar and particular to their religion that don't occur necessarily in many other or any other religions. So, but that's perhaps a topic for ongoing discussion.
If we do a part 2 to this, let me know.
Okay. It opens up some interesting issues, and one of the things Foucault talks about when he's banging on about confession is that he uses the term discourse, because he's, of course, a sociologist, so he's got to use different words for everything, fancy words for everything, just to prove he's an academic. Discourse is not just talking about a thing, but it's also the notion of who is allowed to talk about what. And we're back to this notion of religion providing a hierarchy and a structure, that there are certain things you should talk to your priest about that maybe you shouldn't talk to anybody else about, because it becomes improper if you talk to the wrong people about stuff. And it's not confined to religion, because you can have same arguments about medicine, things like that. Who should you talk to about what? And so there's the notion that, using the medical example, so you've got somebody who is experiencing lumps and bumps or whatever in their body. Who should you talk to about your lumps and bumps? Should you go online and talk to Gladys about whether she thinks crystal therapy will help your lumps and bumps, or should you go and talk to your doctor?
Okay.
Please.
Yeah, precisely. Yes, that's a good point.
Was Foucault part of phenomenology?
Yes, he was an exponent of the phenomenological approach. Absolutely. One of the odder exponents of it has to be said, strange man. Some interesting ideas, despite being very peculiar. Possibly because he was very peculiar, who knows?
Yeah, like Freud, he's like, but you like hearing that. It just comes up with the most.
Absolutely. His analysis of religion is it's all daddy issues.
Yeah, for him, everything's about daddy and mommy issues, which leads me to believe he had a lot of daddy and mommy issues.
Yes. Strange family, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I love the most is he explained homosexuality as a fault of the father. In women, in men, I think it was the fault of the mother, but in women, it was the fault of the father, and that it was obviously it was incorrect and it had to be treated. His daughter turned out to be a lesbian. So I think that was the biggest FU ever she could give him.
So made for some interesting family dinners.
I actually tried to find out what his mom's point of view was on some of his theories, but unfortunately she didn't make any public comments. She moved very far from him though, so I think that's it.
What is the name of this person earlier? Zizek?
Zizek, yes. He is Croatian, I think. Is he Croatian? It's that part of the world, anyway. I'm getting a lift home today. Which makes life so much easier.
Oh, have you got a train to catch?
You know, I'm getting a lift with somebody who works here.
Oh, to where you live?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, okay.
Almost door to door.
No, that's much better.
It does, makes life so much easier. Now, how do I turn the recording off? Let's remind myself. We're pretty much done. I don't know if you had any questions, but
That was great because, you know, we talked to